So we are so excited today to be here to focus on the newly released Farm to ECE Learning Collaborative materials. We're really thrilled to be able to show you these materials, as well as hear from some partners in Indiana that helped create and pilot them. So we are going to jump right in. So here is our agenda for today. We're going to present you with the newly released Farm to ECE Learning Collaborative materials. We're going to highlight how to access those materials. And then we're going to hear from our amazing partners in Indiana. We're going to hear from Megan McKinney Cooper from Jump In for Healthy Kids, and two fabulous trainers from Spark Learning Lab, Jill Tucker and Tanika Finis, to share about their experience leading and implementing these Farm to ECE learning collaboratives in Indiana. And then we'll have time for questions. So I want to share a little bit of background on this project. So a partnership began in 2003 to develop Farm to ECE learning collaborative materials between Nemours Children's Health, Jump In for Healthy Kids, and Spark Learning Lab. The project is made possible in part by a grant from Jump In for Healthy Kids and is supported by the Coronavirus Relief Fund grants from the Department of Treasury. The contents are the responsibility of the authors and don't necessarily represent the views of the Treasury. We also want to acknowledge, as we talk about the background for this project, the Alabama Farm to ECE Coalition, as we use some of their learning collaborative resources as a catalyst and starting point for this project. And also want to acknowledge that a compilation of resources from many states across the country are included in this learning collaborative content. We're really so grateful for the expertise of organizations across the US that are really working to advance Farm to ECE and increase nutrition security and physical activity of children and their families. So through this partnership, materials for 3 learning collaboratives were created to align with the 3 tenets of Farm to ECE: gardening, food and farming education, and local foods, healthy kids. And that's the name that was chosen for the local food purchasing content. So the Spark Learning Lab, mental health and wellness coaches, delivered the learning collaborative content and provided coaching and technical assistance to 15 participants in each of the 3 learning collaboratives. They were delivered in 3 separate learning collaboratives that lasted each between 3 or 4 months. We did want to note, though, that almost all of the participants in that first collaborative, which was gardening, that's what we led with, almost all of them chose to return for the following 2 collaboratives. So a little bit of an overview. So the purpose of these Farm to ECE learning collaboratives is really to engage providers in Farm to ECE learning activities so they can improve the ECE program environments, practices, and policies around Farm to ECE and promote healthy development in young children through hands-on experiences with growing, educating children on how food is grown, and integrating locally grown foods into meals and snacks. So the topics, as I mentioned, they center on the 3 focus areas of Farm to ECE: gardening, food and farming education, and local food procurement, which is what we called Local Foods Healthy Kids. There are 3 sets of learning collaborative materials, with each one focusing on a specific Farm to ECE topic. In terms of the framework, the Farm to ECE learning collaboratives align with the traditional learning collaborative approach. So each of these collaboratives, as I said, takes between 3 to 4 months to implement. A trainer or facilitator is responsible for leading the learning sessions, and leadership teams from the participating programs attend the learning sessions. For centers, that leadership team is usually the owner or director, as well as a lead teacher or other staff member. And for family childcare homes, leadership teams are sometimes just the owner, but other times another staff member will participate. Each of the learning session takes about 60 minutes to deliver as is and can be done either in person or virtually. Throughout all of the materials, there are optional discussion prompts and different opportunities for breakout groups and physical activity breaks. This learning collaborative approach really encourages learning, obviously, but also peer sharing between the participants. So in terms of the structure, so as you can see here, this is the structure for the gardening learning collaborative. And all 3 of them follow a similar structure with 2 learning sessions followed by an action period. And the action periods are for 3 weeks. So all 3 of the collaboratives have 6 learning sessions. And the last section is focused on celebrating success and sharing the participants' storyboards. And during the action periods, the participants have tasks that they work on and receive technical assistance and support from the coaches or facilitators. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the materials that are available. So this material helps guide the planning and implementation. We created these materials in a way that you don't have to be a content expert to present it, but rather that anybody that's interested in bringing together ECE programs to increase their knowledge around farm to ECE and promote farm to ECE can use them. I did want to note before kind of going in on all of them that these resources are really customizable. And we've included prompts throughout to remind you where to add specific information for your region or area. The materials that were developed are specific to Indiana because that's who we piloted these materials with, and include Indiana resources. But because Farm to ECE is so place specific in terms of the resources and services that are available in different regions and states, it's really not possible to create one universal set of materials that gets to the level of personalized support that we want to provide ECE programs that participate. So you will need to spend some time reviewing and modifying the content to include local resources or partners that will be helpful to the ECE programs that you work with. The last thing that I wanted to mention too, before diving in a little bit more, is that all of the materials were created using platforms that are widely available to make it as easy as possible to modify and revise. So we've used Canva, PowerPoint, Word, so that folks in the States can really take them and make them their own. So the facilitator guide that's here up on the screen. Each of the 3 focus areas has a facilitator guide. And the facilitator guide is for the individuals, the trainers, coaches, technical assistants, those folks that are delivering the learning collaborative. And it includes details for planning the learning collaborative, like agendas for each of the learning session, some resources on supporting technical assistance, as well as general planning and implementation considerations. On the left here is a screenshot of one of the pages of the facilitator guide that has some ideas for engaging the community or various farm to ECE stakeholders that you could consider. Again, this guide and all of these materials is developed with flexibility in mind, that the facilitators are encouraged to adapt it to provided the implementation reality and needs of their participants. And this specifically, these guides are created in Canva to make it possible for states to modify and include those state and local resources. And we are able to share the links directly in Canva with you if that's something that you're interested in. So for the resources for each of the learning sessions, there are also editable timelines that highlight the action period objectives for both the facilitators and the coaches, as well as the ECE programs that are participating. These can be editable by changing the dates so that the programs know exactly what to expect of them and also have plenty of notice to prepare for the live sessions. So this is something that could be shared with participants as the learning collaboratives are getting started. Each learning collaborative also has each learning session has a PowerPoint with detailed notes. As you can see, this is just a screenshot of one. The detailed notes include optional discussion prompts, include Zoom breakout room instructions if you're hosting virtually. And we really tried to write the notes in a way that make the content understandable for those that maybe aren't as familiar with Farm to ECE. These notes offer suggestions on where to include that state-specific information. We know that, especially with Farm to ECE, there are so many unique and rich state-specific resources that can and really should be shared with participants. And we also know that growing and access to local fruits and vegetables really varies across climates and times of year. So that's really why we've tried to include prompts and make it flexible. So for each of the learning sessions, there is an editable agenda. I talked about this. These are also in the facilitator guide, but they exist separately. And this is meant to support facilitators. It breaks down the content. As I mentioned, that each of these learning sessions are 60 minutes is the way that we've created them. So it breaks down the content and the estimated time of completion. And each of the collaboratives has an associated resource guide. So these resource guides are for the participating providers. And the goal for this is to share information, tools, and resources to help providers incorporate gardening, food and farming education, and local food purchasing best practices into their policies, practices, and environments. Again, these are created in Canva, so they can be easily shared with you and adapted for your state. I did want to make a note that, especially in the gardening learning collaborative, that it is a little bit more focused on like a gardening 101. We know that there can be, endless information that can be shared about gardening, also food and farming education and local food procurement, but specifically gardening, more advanced topics like composting, for example, it wasn't included here simply because we just didn't have the time. But we really encourage you to consider adding additional gardening or food and farming, local food purchasing topics to your materials as you see fit. All right, so now how to access the materials. So on our Healthy Kids, Healthy Future website, on the trainer page, on the Learning Collaboratives page, you'll see at the bottom, it says Farm to ECE Learning Collaboratives. And there's a lovely little button here that says Farm to ECE Learning Collaborative materials are here. This is gonna get dropped in the chat so you know. That is going to take you to this landing page that gives you a little bit more information and has a form on the right-hand side. You'll include your information there, and then what will open up is a new page that has the links to everything that I just shared. So I just opened here as a screenshot what the gardening looks like. You can see there's a facilitator guide, resource guide, and then information for each of the learning sessions, handouts, timelines, etc. So again, that is in the chat for you. And you can access that on the Healthy Kids, Healthy Future website. I also have our email address here, which we'll share again at the end, that always, if you have any questions. I did want to mention that in terms of action planning and program assessments, the materials on the website incorporate various free tools that are available. There is also a version of these materials that incorporates Go Knapsack. So if you are in a Go Knapsack state, you can reach out to us directly to access those materials. Also, when we wrap up this webinar, there'll be a survey in Zoom that opens in a browser. And within that survey, there's going to be a question that asks specifically if you're in a Go Knapsack state, and you can share your state and your email address. And we'll have you then join a Basecamp page where those materials are housed. As you are downloading and using these materials, we would love to request any feedback on how to improve them, make them more relevant for various audiences. We really appreciate any and all feedback from you as you use and adapt these materials. So with that, I am going to pass it over to my colleague first, Kalisti Chong, to take us into our next session to hear from our amazing partners in Indiana.
Thanks so much, Hannah. I just want to say that it's really been a joy to work on this project over the last year and a couple of months. My two favorite topics of all time are learning collaboratives and farm to ECE. So combining the two approaches has really been a dream project for me. So we do hope that you all will check out the materials. Let us know what you think. We always know that these materials can be improved. Let us know how you think that we can strengthen the content. And we're also really interested in seeing how you all revise them and use them in your states too. So we'd love to hear from you. So please take us up on that. Now I'd like to introduce the person that made it all happen. Megan McKinney Cooper with Jump In for Healthy Kids in Indiana. Megan is the communications director for Jump In and is a phenomenal leader and catalyst for change for health and early learning in Indiana. Megan, can you share with us about Jump In and the Farm to ECE Learning Collaborative project implementation in Indiana?
Kalisti, that's the nicest introduction I've ever had. Thank you so much. My name is Megan McKinney Cooper, and I work for a not-for-profit public health organization called Jump In for Healthy Kids. And it has been my pleasure to lead the creation of this Farm to ECE Learning Collaborative creation. As Hannah mentioned, when we first started, this was funded. We were fortunate to get funding, health issues and challenges funding, which is part of some of the pandemic relief funding, which has enabled us to hire Nemours, to hire Kalisti and Hannah to create this entire library of materials and learning content for these three learning units in Farm to ECE learning collaboratives. And it allows us to share it widely with all of you for free. So we really hope that at the end of this, you in each of your respective states will be inspired to take this wonderful tool and begin implementation in your own communities, or maybe even statewide. So let me start by saying a little bit about Jump In for Healthy Kids. Jump In is 10 years old. We were created by leaders of local health systems to address Indiana's consistently low health rankings across all of the states in the country. Indiana typically tends to rank very lowly in chronic disease and in a lot of other health factors. And Jump In was created to address one of them in the hopes of impacting multiple, and that is to address childhood obesity through preventative systems level change. So I'll let you move the slide forward, Callisti, please. So I have some information about the risk of childhood obesity in Indiana here. It's probably a little bit different where you live, but most of you know that it is a real and growing problem, and that children who don't have mitigation efforts early enough have much higher rates of adult obesity and the chronic diseases associated with that. We also know that children develop their habits around nutrition and physical activity, two of the primary factors that affect overweight and obesity, that they develop those habits by age 5. So I am fortunate in that I get to oversee Jump In for Healthy Kids early childhood work. And so I'm very delighted because it means that I have the opportunity to help create environments, I should say, where children learn healthier habits that they can take with them through their lives. Forward the slide, please. So I am lucky in that I get to lead Indiana's integration of the CDC's spectrum of opportunities. And most of you are familiar with the spectrum. There are 9 different balloons there on that graph, and each one is a systems level intervention that can help improve child health. And it's an intervention at the early childhood level. Farm to ECE is one of them, and we're going to pull the Farm to ECE balloon out in the next slide here, and we'll talk about that. Now, Jump In has worked on several of those balloons in that wheel that you just saw, and we have had incredible partnerships with Nemours Children's Health, as well as Spark Learning Lab and Go Knapsack. My organization is the state lead for Go Knapsack in Indiana, and so we are evangelists in engaging and advocating for Go Knapsack use statewide. Our primary partner in implementing Go Knapsack is Spark Learning Lab, and you're going to hear from Jill and Tanika in just a minute about how they go about this. Indiana is structured in a way that we have a company that is contracted through our Family and Social Services Administration. That company is Spark Learning Lab, and they provide all of the technical assistance support for child care providers across the state. Irrespective of their licensing, Indiana is one of the few states that does not require licensing for all child care providers. And irrespective of their sort of place on our QRIS system. So Spark offers technical assistance and support through coaching, through learning collaboratives, group coaching, libraries of materials that providers can access, and all different levels of support depending on the unique needs and the customized needs of each provider across the state. So they are an incredible resource for Indiana to be able to have. So as Callisti and Hannah have developed all of these materials and we launched the learning collaboratives, Spark has actually been the company that has delivered the learning collaboratives. And the 2 health and wellness coaches, Jill and Tanika, have led this inaugural year of completing these learning collaboratives. So if I take you through this timeline here on the slide quickly, the first thing we did when we received this funding was reach out to Nemours to see if it might be possible for us to create all of this. And I'm not sure if Caliste and Hannah mentioned, but not only do they have this in English, but this is also a Spanish language resource fully. So that's a huge benefit as well. Spark came in and fully embraced implementing these learning collaboratives. We could never have done it without them. We talked through sort of the timelines for all of this and what we were going to call these different 3 learning units. And then we began recruiting providers. We were very lucky that our recruiting was met with a lot of enthusiasm. We had some incentive dollars to pay to the providers who participated. Gardening had the biggest incentive amount because we anticipated that people would have the biggest expense associated with creating gardenings for supplies and tools. And I'm very happy to say that a lot of the providers who started in the initial learning collaborative, the gardening, continued all the way through. I think we had 9 that completed all 3 back to back to back. So we had a lot of recruiting success, and we managed to complete all 3 learning units. And now our next step is to begin to explore how we can keep an ongoing calendar of these Farm to ECE learning collaboratives in Spark's calendar. So we're working on that part. That'll be next. Okay, so we've got a few graphs for you to look at, or a few data points. You can see the state of Indiana there, and those little green stars represent where the providers were across the state. The learning collaborative sessions were held live, but virtually, so that anyone in any part of the state could participate. Some of the TA was provided in person, but most of the learning collaborative work we were able to do virtually. You can see that the best practice adoption had a 200% increase. So it essentially tripled from 4.1 to 12.3%, which we just think was magnificent. 30 unique participants. We had 294 estimated roughly children in those environments that made these improvements. Most of our participants were family child care homes. And in those training sessions, the participants were able to access their state required training hours as well, which was terrific. And I think we have maybe one more slide, which may be a thank you slide. There we go. So of course, we'll have a Q&A session here, and Caliste, you may have questions you'd like me to answer right now, if you'd like.
We don't have any questions in the chat yet. Does anyone have any questions so far? Questions for Megan, questions about the materials themselves before we jump into the next section? So please speak to the in-person and virtual attendance.
Okay, so I'm going to actually let Tanika and Jill run with that since they were the ones leading the learning sessions. I will just mention that we had a set meeting time, a regular meeting time, and they were live, but they were virtual. So there weren't recorded sessions. Everybody met at the same time, because we have learned, Spark they're really experts at delivering learning collaboratives. And we get a lot of feedback that having those live sessions offers the providers that peer-to-peer interaction, and they find that very valuable. So it was really important to us to make sure that our learning sessions were live rather than sort of a prescribed recording. There were a few times that providers just couldn't squeeze it in, and so Jill and Tanika shared with them like a recorded session to go through, but for the most part, it was all live participation in the learning sessions.
And I will share that all of these materials can be used either virtually or in person. We tried to include some notes throughout for if you're going to do it virtually, then you should consider this, or use breakout rooms for this particular conversation. Or if you're going to do it in person, then consider breaking into different groups and things like that. And we tried to incorporate different types of activities and ways that you could do those types of activities, both in person or virtually. yes, live but virtual. That was how we implemented in Indiana.
It also adds, when you do live but virtual, it also makes it possible for location not to be a factor for the participants. So you can have participants who are all over the state, and you don't have to factor in a drive time or try to group them based on a geographic area. You can, cast a wider net. And, Tanika and Jill will talk a little bit about just sort of the varying kinds of environments that resulted, because some of the providers were in urban areas, some were in more rural areas, which means they have totally different resources, and you can still adjust to, to help out a provider in any kind of environment.
One more question for you, Megan. Folks are asking about the incentives that were provided to the participating childcare programs.
Yeah. So we were lucky. We had a pot of money, and we tried to figure out, sort of you're always kind of walking a fine line of, when you offer an incentive, you want the incentive to be both a reward for the provider and help interest them in participating, but also you recognize that they're going to have expenses associated with the work that they're trying to do. So you want to make sure, you're trying to guesstimate, I suppose, the right amount of money to help them and also make them feel like their time has been rewarded and that there is a payoff for them. So we graded it. So the first learning session, we had a significant cash incentive. So for gardening, each provider was eligible for $1,000. We issued $500 halfway through, and then the second $500 installment upon completion. Food and farming education, we knew would not have as much of an expense associated with it, but still some expense. And so that was half as much. So it was a $500 incentive paid in 2 installments, $250 and $250. By the time we got to food and farming education, of course, we didn't have as much money, but we also wanted to make sure we were giving them something significant. And so I believe that incentive was $250 total. So we kind of halved it each time. We had such a robust reaction to our recruiting that we were surprised. And I don't say that like, oh, well, everybody wanted to participate, so we didn't need to offer as high incentives as time went on. But it did make us think, okay, well, if we, are we giving the right amount? Because we didn't want to spend money on something that could be used for something else if it was needed for something else. But in the end, I think we got positive reactions from our providers based on the incentive dollars that they got. It was really fun to see what people spent their money on, because they showed us equipment and storage materials. One person, one center bought a composter. So it was really great to see the variety of things that people use their incentive dollars on. And I hope that they were also able to use their incentive dollars on, trying new foods and all kinds of things like that. They, it was, I feel like, that ongoing expense of incentive dollars can sometimes be a barrier to truly embedding, these kinds of learning collaboratives. But for now, I feel like if it isn't required, it's extraordinarily helpful to offer some kind of incentive. And I think providers need it. I think they need that support.
I agree. Several years ago, I hosted some focus groups with childcare providers in Alabama, and one of the things that they mentioned was that you're sharing all this amazing information, you're sharing all of these things that we truly want to do, but we just don't have the funding to do it. And so it's been my intention since then to provide some type of financial support to help them with their efforts. So thank you for that response, Megan.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Megan. We truly appreciate our partnership with Jump In and are grateful that we've had the opportunity to develop these materials and to be able to share them with other states. So thank you for helping to make all of this possible.
Oh, thank you so much. We could never have done this without these partnerships. Thank you.
All right. So we also have with us the 2 coaches that Megan and Hannah have both mentioned. They are incredible coaches in the state of Indiana. They led all 3 of the Farm to ECE Learning Collaborative pilots over the last year. So I have with me Jill and Tanika. They're mental health and wellness coaches with Spark Learning Lab. And they're going to talk with us about their experience working with ECE programs throughout these learning collaboratives. We started the first learning collaborative in May 2023, which feels like eons ago, but it was just a year and 2 months ago. And we finished the third learning collaborative this past April. So it's been a whirlwind of a year, and Jill and Tanika have navigated these learning collaboratives beautifully over this last year. So thank you all so much for joining us. So I'd like to ask Tanika, can you start us off with sharing a little bit about the work that Spark Learning Lab does? I know that Megan touched on that, but if there's anything else to share, and then about your role, your and Tanika, your and Jill's roles at Spark.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is, as Khaleesi said, Tanika Fennessy, and I am a mental health and wellness early childhood consultant. And some of the things that I will talk about with Shine, we'll start off is that Spark is a project of Shine Early Learning, and it's Indiana's early childhood education and out of school um, out of school time technical assistance vendor. We also provide learning opportunities through trainings, coaching, resources, and supporting the quality of programs that are served here in Indiana. We also provide supports around business, mental health and wellness, and classroom practices for program leaders. And for us as mental health and wellness coaches, some of the things that we're able to do is just being able to observe and focus on the mental health and wellness of your classroom staff and your classroom environment. We also look at the classroom interactions. And during that observation, what we're hoping to be able to do is to just identify any challenges that might be happening in the classroom that the caregivers might be experiencing. Some of the ways that we do that and some supports that we have and other tools that we use are different mental health and wellness topics, things that are from Learn the Signs, Act Early, Ages and Stages. Go Knapsack was also one of our resources working on promoting wellness in the workplace. And with the families, we tried to implement that and include them as well. We also use the Calm app, and we try to do and help programs to figure out different ways for self-care can that can help them while they're in the classroom when they're teaching the children. So those are just some of the things that we do as mental health and wellness coaches.
Thank you. So for both of you, what has been your experience leading these learning collaboratives, especially as coaches that are new to farm to early care and education topics?
So I can go ahead and I'll start. So it was for me because gardening was something that I hadn't done before. So for me, it was a new experience, but also a good experience. It was different things that I was able to gather, things that I was able to learn, and that I felt like I wanted to also be able to try. And so I just feel like the information was laid out for us really well, and we were able to adapt it to our programs once we were able to get to know them a little bit better.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jill. I second that. Tanika and I both had zero experience with this, and we often talked about how much we were learning. So it was very helpful. I found the slides and the information on the slides as someone brand new, but coming in to train as if we were experts, although also being very clear and authentic with our providers that we were not. That it was easy to train it, easy to coach it, because of the information that was given to us ahead of time and how prepared everyone helped us to be.
Thank you. And even on the evaluation forms, several providers said things like, we appreciate that the trainers are so transparent about the work that they're doing, the information that they may not know, and that they're willing to reach out to others to find resources for us or find out information that they may not know themselves. So a lot of providers have been really vocal about being grateful for that. All right. What part of the Learning Collaborative do you feel made the most difference for the participating ECE programs?
I think a lot of it had to do with having individualized coaching. So, as was mentioned earlier, we had 15, I believe, in each. So Tanika and I split the group, and we were each able to offer very individualized coaching support, because we had programs who were like us, we knew nothing about it, had never tried gardening, had never tried anything farm to ECE, all the way to the most experienced people. And so I think having that support, and also them really meeting consistently live with one another to be able to talk about what they were doing, ideas share, they got really excited. And I felt like that was probably as meaningful as having coaching support after the sessions.
Yeah, and those thoughts are definitely supported in the evaluation comments too. I'll share just a couple of comments that I found that I thought were really meaningful. So one provider said that, I like the one-on-one time. It was really nice to have someone care enough to say, hey, are you okay? Do you need any support? You're doing great. Take it a little at a time. I think that speaks to the level of support and the relatability that Jill and Tanika really put forth throughout this learning collaborative with the providers. Another person said, I loved how the coaches treated me as a person, not just a project. I have a lot going on, and they took that into account as I tried to balance and juggle it all. And then last quote that I'll share is that I think it was great. I love how much I gained from the coaches and other participants. I love how everyone had their own spin on it, and it opened up new ideas for us. So I think that's truly a testament for how this entire learning collaborative process really works together. And I always say that it's kind of the technical assistance piece is the magic sauce that kind of holds it all together. But all of it together, I truly feel like is just like the most amazing quality improvement process and way to walk folks and childcare providers through that entire process from start to finish. All right. Let's talk about some of the changes that the childcare providers made during their time of participating in the learning collaboratives, either with just changes they made in their program or changes they made with family engagement. Can you all share about that a bit?
Yes, so I know I think my group, I had 8. I feel like they were split. So there were some who were more experienced, and this was like maybe a refresher for them, or it was something that they already knew and they were able to add to it. But then for others, it was brand new. They were just getting started, some being a little bit frustrated, but towards the end, we noticed the change. And something that you said about them appreciating like the technical assistance part, which was usually when we met one on one, is that telling them that every program is going to look different. So where one person is in their journey in working through the gardening, or even just the knowledge about farm to ECE, another person might be somewhere else, and that's okay. And so really trying to focus on one thing as opposed to 10, and being able to accomplish that one thing, and then, moving on to the next. So I think for me, I did see programs who in the very beginning, they weren't really sure, kind of frustrated, but even once we got to the end, they were excited. And one thing I reminded them about is that, the goal for us is for them to continue even after we're done. So I think that was a question, but we just definitely tried to reiterate that, is that the goal was for us to give the information to the program, and then they work on it where they were. They didn't have to necessarily have all the other things of some of their other peers, because they may have been at a different place in it. So I saw changes in people wanting to be changing menus, adding things to their menus. The most exciting part was when they would plant and then they'd start to harvest and see the growth. So those were always exciting parts for us.
Yeah, for sure. I think on the family engagement side, some of the really cool things I saw, I had one provider who in the I can't remember, maybe it was the gardening one, but there were farmers markets at the time. And so she had families and children sign up to run her table. And they took what they had gotten from the garden to sell at the farmers market. So I thought that was really cool that the children got to do it, but the families got to sign up if they could participate, like on a Saturday. Another really cool thing, probably one of the things that stood out to me the most was at the third collaborative, I had a provider who wasn't involved in the first one. So she didn't have a garden, but she had someone down the street from one of her sites who did have a garden. And so I noticed she did it, and a lot of people were sharing like boxes, like take home what we got from our garden. But she took it a step further because she had babies through, I want to say pre-K, and she juiced things. They made baby food. Families were getting involved in that. She talked a lot about the cost effectiveness of that. And really teaching families how to do those things and make sure, like, oh, if your fruit's going bad or your vegetables are going bad, we can still use it for juices, baby food, etc. And that was really powerful. And she was one of the only ones who thought of that. So that was probably some of the most powerful family engagement change that I saw.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing. Someone asked in the chat, are the self-assessment resources available for us? So for the Indiana implementation, we utilize the Go Knapsack Farm to ECE self-assessment and tools. So if you're located in a state that has a Go Knapsack license, and Hannah, can you put the Go Knapsack website in the chat? Then you can utilize those resources, because all the child care providers in states that have a Go Knapsack license should be able to access Go Knapsack. And if you aren't already trained as a TA consultant for Go Knapsack to be able to utilize the materials yourself as a trainer or a coach, you can also go through those trainings. I think they're held every single month. For the open source version, the version that has the free content and materials, we utilize the National Farm to School Network and the Association of State Public Health Nutritionists Farm to ECE self-assessment. So that is something that is free to use. It also has an action planning tool within it. We're not using the action planning tool for these learning collaboratives, but if you wanted to, you could use that. So that's what we suggest using if you don't have a Go Knapsack license, and that is free. Just wanted to answer that question. And then I have a few more questions for Jill and Tanika. What would you do differently if you were to lead additional farm to ECE learning collaboratives?
One thing that we talked about was just making sure that the modules are aligned as best as possible with the seasons, because that was something we found with some of our participants, and the planting, which I had no idea about planting seasons, planting times, which vegetables or fruits should be planted when. And so just trying to make sure as you're rolling out the modules that you try or research and find the information on the best time or the best seasons in starting, for instance, like the gardening or anything like that.
Another thing that Tanika and I learned in the first collaborative, the gardening one, it's really exciting for the providers to share their storyboards at the end. So they all created a video or a PowerPoint presentation where they got to share some of their successes and sometimes their failures, just to show that that's a normal part of the process. And that was really exciting, but we only had an hour set for each learning session. So the last session being a learning session, we had a lot of storyboards to get through. And so we figured out that it is easiest, if you're going to do that, to put all of those into one PowerPoint because we were going off and sharing each person's thing, and it just took way too much time. So if you're going to do that, and I would suggest doing it because it was really powerful and meaningful to them to get to talk about their own sites. They also got great ideas from one another for that sustainability piece. For the time's sake, put it all into one PowerPoint so you're not off sharing and then unsharing constantly.
Thank you, Jill. So someone asked in the chat about your role as the coaches for these learning collaboratives. Can you share a little bit more about what all you all actually did and how you split your TA groups? Because you all facilitated the learning collaborative as a pair, so you did it together. And I feel like for learning collaboratives like this, having two people leading the learning collaborative together works really well. Takes a lot of coordination, I think, but works really well. So can you share a little bit how you all split up the duties and the responsibilities for the learning collaborative?
So we just decided, we just kind of chose according to, we tried to choose a little bit according to area, and we just decided to split the group in half. And then we also decided, I think, Jill, did you have odd numbers and I had even, or was it the other way around? I can't remember.
I think it varied each time.
Yeah, so we just took the learning sessions that we had, and Jill just decided she'd do the odd numbers. I decided I'd do the even sessions. When I say the numbers, I mean the sessions. And we each just did that. So for session one, Jill prepared everything that needed to be done. If they needed to share anything, I acted as host. So if there were questions or if there were things that we needed to write down to remember, I would write those things down. And then afterwards, Jill and I usually always met for a little bit after we were all done to just kind of discuss what had happened, discuss any questions we maybe didn't have the answer for and we needed to answer. And then during our, what they called the TA sessions, the times after, we did 2 live sessions, and then we had about a week and a half or 2 of just what we called the technical assistance time. And that was when we met individually with each of our programs, and we just talked with them specifically about what they may have needed help with, any struggles they may have had, and then trying to help them find some of those resources. So that's the way that we had it split up. And then if there were times that we needed to switch, of course, we talk. And so we were able to switch those things. But typically we just, in the very beginning, decided who would take the odd sessions, who would take the even sessions, and we went from there.
Awesome. And I feel like from the outside looking in, that worked really well.
It did. It was nice to have a partner and nice to have someone to share the workload with.
Yeah. Someone asked, did you do the TA virtually or in person?
It was all virtual. Everything that we did was virtual.
So did you all mostly have Zoom meetings with all of the participants individually?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. My final question for you all is, what words of wisdom do you have for others that are thinking about implementing these farm to ECE learning collaboratives?
You want to go first?
Yeah, Jill, definitely.
You want me to go first?
Yes.
This is how we roll, guys. So I think the biggest piece is remembering, what coaching's all about. Tanika spoke on it. It's really getting highly individualized, understanding where someone's at and where they want to go, but also helping them remember, change process isn't easy. And so like what Tanika said earlier, those just do one step at a time, the most doable step first. It takes time to create change, and helping them remember, like, you're going to have some failures, especially in the garden. And that happened, and helping them remember that's actually very normal during change. Anytime you're making change, and helping them give themselves, grace and compassion, and continuing just to support them wherever they're at, because they have a million other things going on. And so I think it's just really important to be a human being with them and help them just remember it's okay, you know, and those baby steps like Tanika spoke on earlier. I don't know what you might add, Tanika.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. The one thing that I will say, the questions pop up and then they go away. But the one thing that I want to also give credit to is to Khaleesi and Hannah. They had things laid out for us that was very easy to follow. The thing that worked well is that we were able to adapt or modify some of the stuff as far as the information they gave us, if timing, sometimes on the live sessions, we'd have really, really good conversations. So it would take a longer period of time. Other times they were quiet. And so we were able to fill it in. But someone said something, one of the questions about how we were doing it. And Khaleesi also mentioned that there's tasks in each one. We had like uh a facilitator checklist, and I'm not sure if that was the name of it. And then we had a participant checklist. And so on each one, it would list the session, what we were going to talk about. Then during the action period, it would list things that we should cover during that action period. So Hannah and Khaleesi, they both did a really good job of having us prepared to do it because as she had mentioned before, you know, it's for people who may have lots and lots of experience and knowledge, but then for also people who don't have that much knowledge, but still being able to give help as an expert in the area as they're doing it.
Thank you both so much for everything, for working with us on this. It was truly incredible having the opportunity to work with you all on this, especially to be able to introduce you all to Farm to ECE. So that was a real treat for me. All right. So I know that we have some questions, but before we jump into the questions that we haven't answered yet, I'd love to invite Megan back to share any final thoughts or reflections that she had about the learning collaboratives and work in Indiana.
Yeah, so when we started this close to an hour ago, Khaleesi started by talking about the two things near and dear to her heart, learning collaboratives and Farm to ECE. And, you know, I thought that was nice going in, but now I get it. Having sat through the storyboard presentations in each of these 3 learning sessions, I totally understand why Farm to ECE is your favorite. Because I was so moved by the creativity of the providers, and I was so moved by the enthusiasm of the providers and the enthusiasm that they were able to inspire in their kids and in their families and their centers. And you know, we had providers participate in these 3 learning collaboratives that were from such different areas with very different resources, and they all just maximized what they had. So one provider had a farm next door. It was a rural provider. They had a farm. So she would take the kids out to watch the cows, and she would take the kids out to watch the farmers, you know, harvesting, and then would teach them about that and tie it all into these learning collaboratives. I mentioned earlier, one of the providers went all in on composting, and she bought a turning composter and taught the kids all about composting and how they were going to use the composting. And I loved the uniqueness of each of their work, and just found it to be extraordinarily inspiring. So some of you know Aviva Starr over at Go Knapsack. I work closely with her as well. And she mentioned to me sometime in the last couple of months that a lot of the states that she works with tend to be reluctant to do learning collaboratives of any kind because they feel like they don't have a template for delivering them, and they're a little concerned that they're not subject matter experts. And I hope that this hour that we've all participated in can inspire you, if you aren't already, to start to think about doing learning collaboratives in your state. Because as you can see, with the right guides, you don't have to be subject matter experts. You're learning alongside, And the goal of this work is, of course, improvement, not perfection. And we used the Go Knapsack tool as part of this. There are other tools you can use as well. But Go Knapsack is specifically designed to be a continuous improvement loop. So it's not designed to reach perfection, but to go back to it and make improvements over time. So I saw one of the questions in the chat was, how have you constructed this so that there's sustainable and continuing improvement? And I guess my answer to that would be, well, we have Go Knapsack for our state, and we constantly encourage our providers to use that on their own, which they have free access to and can do that anytime, or in partnership with Spark Learning Lab, because Spark will continue to offer learning collaboratives in several of the Go Knapsack learning domains. We don't have one scheduled for more Farm to ECE yet, but hopefully soon. But they also can access additional resources and some coaching if they need it. But having that tool ready and available and to be communicating about that tool, I think, is Indiana's way of consistently encouraging that sustainable practice of improvement. So I think those are my points, but I would encourage all of you to consider launching learning collaboratives if you aren't already.
Thanks so much,
Just
Megan.
so grateful for all of this. So thank you for participating today, and thank you to Kalisti and Hannah, and of course, thank you so much to Jill and Tanika.
Yes, awesome. So I will hand it back over to Hannah to go through a last couple of slides. And if anyone has any final questions, you can put it in the chat. I feel like we answered all of the questions that were shared already, either in the chat or through this session so far.
All right, got to make sure I take myself off mute. Thank you all for that great conversation and insights that everybody shared. It's just really energizing. So I just wanted to highlight in our last few minutes a few things. This is part 2 of 3 of our resource showcase this summer. Part 3 is coming up on July 23rd, where we are going to highlight the PALS micro trainings that have been released. We're going to drop a link in the chat for that on how to register, also the QR code here. And so we hope to see you there. And also really wanted to highlight just earlier this week, I believe, a newly released podcast highlighting early childhood work in our partner state of Delaware. We are thrilled to be able to have a family child care provider on our podcast, our partner at Rodella State Organization, and one of the members of the Nemours Children's Health team. It's a fabulous podcast. It's about 30 minutes. Highly recommend you take a listen if you have time. Last but not least, here are mine and Khaleesi's emails. If you have any questions about the materials, if you use the materials and want to share feedback with us, as we shared, we really would love any and all feedback, or just to hear how you're adapting the materials for your state. But really, thank you again for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Huge thank you to Megan, Tanika, Jill, for your partnership, for being here today. And we really thank you all so much. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.